What's up, guys? This is our very first episode of Beyond the Block with Mr. Dylan Kuning. My name is Donovan Kinzer, and we're going to be talking about all things crypto world. In these kind of podcasts, they don't really exist right now where they're educationally based, but also we kind of speculate a little bit. We talk about conspiracies. We think about things in the future on what could be just based on like the world's transitioning into technological advances, different fiat currencies, different rules and laws coming out, countries coming together, things of that nature. So today, the first episode is going to be Crypto World 101. We're going to just try to dive into the absolute primitive basics of like what this is so your great grandma can understand it. You know, like a lot of people, it's scary. There is a tech phobia currently in the world that people don't even really like to use their smartphone, let alone try to learn what any kind of crypto anything is, or like what a blockchain or node or any of that stuff is. And so we're going to try to like dive into the basics of it and try to talk about it as if it's like 1940, and we're just going to try to make it as primitive as possible. And so it's going to be a challenge, but we're going to do our best. And so without further ado, I'd also like to introduce my co-host, Mr. Dylan Kuning. How's it going, my bud?
Mr. Donovan Kinzer, how you doing, bud? Awesome, man. Thank you for having me.
Fantastic.
And yeah, I'm really excited about this podcast. I'm really excited to share as much knowledge as I know about this space and really try to teach as many people about it in the way that I understand it. I am going to be starting off each episode with the date and what the price of the Bitcoin is. Today, it is September 21st. On CoinMarketCap, it's right now it's 11:30 in the morning. The price of Bitcoin is at $63,237, and it's up about 5.5% over the last week. So we've had a nice bullish week, and actually we are finally breaking out of this long sideways downward action that we've been having for almost a 6-month period. A lot of people were spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt and saying, oh, there's never going to be a bull run. This is not going to happen. And they think that because BlackRock and other kinds of institutional investments firms are involved in Bitcoin now, that they're, you know, manipulating Bitcoin to a degree. And then that could be true. But yeah, today's episode 1, and I don't want to be getting into too many technicalities about Bitcoin, but I know that in today's episode, we are going to really just break down what is Bitcoin, what is cryptocurrency, and really just trying to get into the meat and potatoes about this new and exciting space. And yeah, so go ahead, Don. Let's kind of start with some questions and trying to get into exactly what is cryptocurrency, what is Bitcoin, and what kind of why does it have a value of $63,500 today?
Yeah, and it's gone up further than that, right? Like we've gone past 63,000. I think market top was probably 73, 75, somewhere around there. But the interesting that I find about Bitcoin, and before we begin into like what is cryptocurrency, is that it's barely brand new to America or just the world in general. It
Yeah,
began back in January 3rd, 2009. So it seems like 2009 was like yesterday.
yeah,
Doesn't seem like that long ago. You know, what are we talking? We're talking 15 years, 14 years, something like
exactly.
that.
It's 15 and a half years, and really only have people been able to, buy Bitcoin really for the last 14 years. And it was very difficult to purchase even in the beginning. So we can say that it's only really been mainstream where people have been able to buy on apps and exchanges that are easy to get to for, let's say, about a 10-year period. So really that's kind of the space that we've seen and really start to see this hockey stick formation and the growth of this space happen. Now it's happening at a faster rate than even the internet. If we look back at the early 90s, kind of when the internet was starting to started to have its hockey stick formation in terms of its growth path.
Yeah, I mean, YouTube is actually older than Bitcoin is technically. And so when we look at it and we understand what is cryptocurrency, from what I presume to be is essentially digital cash, just like if you had your Chase debit card, that's digital cash essentially at the end of the day. It's just monitored by a third party entity between you and I. Instead of me sending money to you, they manage it, they take a look at it, and they decide if that is a legal disbursement of funds or not, or what have you, right? So like what I guess help me understand more like what is cryptocurrency in layman's terms from a primitive level? How much more primitive can we get than a digital cash?
Right. So, I mean, I think digital cash is probably good, but a lot of people could argue that the United States dollar is digital cash since only about 1 or 2% of all fiat cash, cash only exists in cash. The other 98 or 99% only exists digitally, Don. So the US dollar is a digital cash if you really look at it for the main part. Um, and so, yes, Bitcoin, I would say that the biggest difference between US dollars and Bitcoin is that we don't have any central authority controlling Bitcoin, right? You don't have a government or a centralized bank, an IMF or a Rothschild bank controlling Bitcoin. So it's essentially a freedom of currency and money. And the other thing that's the main difference between fiat and Bitcoin is that we keep printing dollars, by the trillions every other day. And we got to go and save Ukraine, and we got to fight all these wars in the Middle East all the time. So we got to constantly be printing more money. Um, and the more they do that, the more they devalue the currency, right? So this is how we see inflation, right? We start to see everything going up in price, but really it's the expansion of the money supply that's making the money weaker, right? That's what we don't really see. And the main difference is that Bitcoin has a set number of 21 million Bitcoin. And they can be broken down even more, right? It's not like you own one Bitcoin. It can be broken down into thousands of little shares, let's say, and they're called Satoshis. But I don't want to get too technical right now. Um, but yes, essentially, I can send my Bitcoin to you. So Bitcoin is acting as a bank, but it's also a currency at the same time. So it's solving a number of problems, and it's a deflationary asset because it's only got 21 million Bitcoin, and we've already mined what, like 96.5% of all the Bitcoin already.
Yep.
So we've we've only got a little less than 4% of all the Bitcoin left to be mined. Um, and now it's a race to see who can try to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible because every 4 years, the amount of Bitcoin or new Bitcoin in circulation that gets mined every day gets cut in half, right? So we just went from us having almost, it was about 900 Bitcoin being mined per day, and now on April 20th, that the protocol basically just cut the Bitcoin in half, meaning that miners could now only mine 450 Bitcoin per day. And we have institutions like BlackRock and Fidelity that can purchase that amount of Bitcoin by themselves in a day. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
but like
definitely.
even more simplistic than that, essentially what like the miner is like a little robot that sits on a shelf that's in a building similar to like a barn, right? And it's kind of like a chicken producing eggs. And so the chicken has to go through the process of being able to obviously create the egg inside of its body and then lay the egg, right? That's
Yeah,
kind of what the Bitcoin miner does is like it
it's
goes through the process of trying to understand the math problem, if you will, a complex math problem, and it's rewarded with an egg when it does. When it figures that problem out, it gets an egg, and the egg is a Bitcoin or
That is a
a
great
percentage of it.
analogy, Don. I've never heard that analogy. I don't know if you thought that up yourself, but that's a genius analogy.
Thank you.
And yes, it would be if they were laying golden eggs, essentially worth a lot more than your regular egg.
Correct. So
Right.
then, like
So,
obviously, that like there it can only fit, and so like every time that the math problem gets solved, it gets harder, and so the chicken has a harder time trying to figure out the math problem. So you get less eggs,
right.
and so the less eggs you
Or as the
get,
chicken gets older, it's harder for it to be producing eggs as it originally was. That's a great analogy. And
yeah,
yes, that's exactly what happens. So obviously the people then have more mining rigs, or more computers that are solving these problems. And what is the problem that it's solving? Well, it's solving all of these transactions, right? It's solving, oh, Donnie just sent Dylan 10 Bitcoin, and so and so just sent so and so this amount of Bitcoin. So it's calculating all of those transactions and also how much each wallet, which is the bank account essentially, how much each person is holding of each amount of Bitcoin essentially.
Yeah, it's like the brain. The brain at the end of the day is a computer, and
Right.
the brain likes to be rewarded, right?
Right.
And so, like, naturally, when you go in and you solve a problem, when the brain solves the problem, it wants to be rewarded with serotonin, dopamine, what have you. Same thing with like this mining bot. The mining bot is kind of a brain that wants to be rewarded, so it's going to work hard to figure this out, and it has to stay cool. It can't overheat. The brain can't overheat because then it can't operate correctly. Then it gets harder to solve the problem, and then it's like it's a chaotic moment, right? It's like it's the brain, the Bitcoin miner, if you will, the chicken gets stressed out, and now it's like, I can't solve the problem, you know. So the cryptocurrency itself is like a digital wallet, like Venmo, Apple Pay, Cash App, whatever. It's like if I give money to Dylan, then Venmo takes a percentage. That middleman is like, hey man, I want my cut. But cryptocurrency, like digital currency in itself, that we're talking about now, this decentralized currency, that middleman doesn't exist. That's the
Right.
difference, right? That bank that you're talking about doesn't exist. I
And
have
then
my money, you have yours.
and then also the fees to send it between you and me is just a lot less. So I'm
Yep.
not saying that there's no fees because there are some fees, but it would just be a fraction of what you would be paying if you were going to be sending a similar amount, via a wire transfer or MoneyGram or Western Union or something along those kind of lines.
Why does that fee exist though? Like, who are we paying? Like, I think of it as like a bridge troll, where it's like in order to
So
cross the bridge, you got to pay the toll, right? So the
yeah,
energy that is exacerbated, you have to pay for.
Yeah, that's I would say that that's a good way to look at it. The fees are paying the miners to a degree, and the fees are paying the exchange to a degree. So it's getting split into that to keep them running essentially. Yeah,
Okay. So like
yeah,
obviously like cost of maintenance and things of that nature play into the part of like making this all operate correctly.
correct.
Obviously, it's not being adopted on a world level yet, but some countries are starting to look into it and some actually have adopted it.
Yeah,
But it seems like they're not because of the energy requirements that are required to be able to make it on a large scale basis where I'm able to send you money, you send me money, that
yeah.
there's like literal electricity energy that is required for that process, that exchange, right?
Yeah, it's a tremendous amount of electricity, in fact. But there are a lot of smart people, a lot of smart countries out there. As far as I understand, El Salvador, which has made Bitcoin legal tender, I believe that they are running their mining rigs on some sort of volcanic energy. So they are figuring out a way to really not be, let's say, spending the money in electricity to run their mining operations. But yes, there are definitely a lot of smarter ways to be doing it than your conventional running it through your electrical grid because it would end up being very, very taxing and expensive to do that.
Yeah,
But they're saying, I mean, today they're saying that the cost to produce a Bitcoin is somewhere in the range of around, $60,000. So that is why, right? That's the reason why they're saying that this is the reason that it costs the price that it does today of around $60,000 because that's essentially the cost of electricity to produce a Bitcoin today. Um,
got it.
I think what we should do kind of since we're already on this topic, I do want to share my screen and I want to play a couple of clips of a video where I have Michael Saylor, who is a Bitcoin evangelist. If you don't know who he is, he does a very, very good job of explaining what Bitcoin is, why it has a lot of value, and he kind of touches more on these fiat currencies and why they continue to lose money through history. So I'm going to just quickly share that
Let's
video.
run it.
Michael Saylor does a much better job than what I could. So, all right, well, here we go. One sec. And
Just want to say I'm having fun so far. This is cool.
yeah, me too. Oh, Donnie, I gotta hold on. I gotta open up a new window for this because
All good.
yeah,
But
this
real
is
quick, as you're doing that, basically, so like a blockchain that Bitcoin exists on, not to dive into the blockchain too much, but just so people can kind of wrap their head around it before Michael Saylor gets into it. It's essentially like a Google spreadsheet that once you input data onto, you can't delete it. Once it's there, it's there. And so like that kind of manages the transactions between Dylan and I. When I send him money or he sends me money, that goes onto that spreadsheet to never be deleted ever again. So that exists somewhere. You can see it, you can look into it, it will exist there forever. And so Michael Saylor will kind of go into this, I presume, but that's basically what it is, like a Google spreadsheet essentially to keep record of transactions.
Right. Um, Damn, I'm using my wife's computer right now, so I
It's
hope this
all
is
good.
gonna work. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to do it for you next time.
That's all
So
good.
yeah. Okay. All right, here we go. One, two, three. Is this
Woo!
sharing?
Has
Yeah,
gone
there we go.
zero. And the
Okay.
USD is just the latest in a long lineage of collapsing currencies.
Every fiat currency in the history of the world has gone to zero. The greatest fiat currency in the history of the world is the dollar, and the dollar has been losing 7% of its value every year for 100 years, which means if you do the math, you'll find that over the course of about 100 years, you'll lose 99.9% of your money in the dollar, and that's the best it's going to be. It gets worse than that. If you happen to be in Turkey or Lebanon or Argentina, you're going to lose 99.9% of your wealth in 25 or 30 years, unless you're in Venezuela, in which case you may lose it within 5 to 10 years.
The frog doesn't really feel the water boiling when it's just a temperature or two. But by the time that frog is cooked, it's too late. Even over the course of 30 years, which I imagine many people watching this channel are somewhere in that age range, will have lost a third of their wealth. Like Michael Saylor points out there, if you're in another country, such as Venezuela, it's happening much faster, in as few as 10 years in some cases. Next up, Michael Saylor talks about energy, and some of these stats are truly staggering. If anybody tells you that Bitcoin has no value, point them to minute 13 of this conversation, because this is the part where Michael Saylor talks about how much has been invested into just the mining aspect of Bitcoin.
Bitcoin miners have invested about $25 billion in capital to roll out many, many millions, 5, 6, 7 million of these mining rigs to generate 400 exahash, 400 exahash of digital power, which is backed by about 12.5 gigawatts of electricity.
Let me go over those numbers again real quick here. You've got $25 billion spent on mining machines, and for that money, you get about 5 to 7 million mining rigs. To power all of those rigs, you need 12.5 gigawatts of power, and that generates 400 exahash. He goes on to explain.
All right. So I just want to stop right there with the screen sharing, but I think that that is a very, very good video for us to kind of see how big this network is. You know, he's saying that there's 6 to 7 million Bitcoin mining rigs all around the world, right? And we've, you know, these miners have spent anywhere around $25 billion to essentially have all of these computers running this network.
Yeah, that's insane. Basically, he's saying 12 gigs of power, which is on average like 19 million houses worth of power. 19 million
Yeah.
houses. Like that's insane.
Or 1,000 times the power that's powering the U.S. Navy. I mean, this is just unbelievable. The amount of power that's generating this network. But when you really think about it, and you understand that over the course of the last 15 years, that this network has never gone down. There's never been a crash. It's never been hacked, and it's been running pretty much at 100% efficiency rate over the last 15 years, while the network has been growing, while all of these transactions have been increasing, and this is just completely unfazed, essentially. Although there have been a few little changes in the networks, but that's another thing. It's like it's an open network, so people essentially get to vote on how they want the Bitcoin, how they want this movement to go, essentially, in
Right.
which
But
direction. Yeah.
it's a true democracy at the end of the day, the way that I perceive it, because you can actually have a global voice from each individual who says this is for the betterment of us entirely, right? Where like you can see that in real time. Nobody can control that.
Exactly. That's it,
That's what I
man.
like about it. I like the transparency and I like the security aspect where they're like, well, if I go buy drugs with it, like how do I securely do that? And it's like, well, there's ways around it too, but like the aspect of being able to see like if I paid taxes I can see where my tax dollars go now. That's what this is talking about.
Right. And then again, I mean, I think we should probably touch on that for a second, because when we're talking about a digital ledger and complete and utter transparency, we have a number of websites online where you can go to and you can see all the Bitcoin transactions that have happened in the past, and you can also see the Bitcoin transactions happening in real time between wallet to wallet. So you don't actually have a person's name, but each wallet is providing 100% anonymity, but it's really just a series of letters and numbers that are together, and they're showing, oh, this wallet just sent X amount of Bitcoin to this wallet, and within a number of confirmations, that Bitcoin will be in that wallet. So it's, yeah, we've never had this before. We've never had a world where we've had complete transparency, where we've had all of this security, and then we've also at the same time had a global currency where we don't need any third party to be able to send and receive this value, essentially.
Yep. And the other thing that I saw in that video, which is important to discuss also, which I find this to be my hill that I die on frequently. Let's say theoretically you have $20,000 in your bank account, and then Bitcoin happens to just go to $1 million overnight for some reason. We don't know why. It just happens to go to $1 million overnight per coin. If the US dollar is backed by that, and to some degree it says, hey, this coin is worth more than that fiat currency, your $20,000 now becomes worth $1,300 on purchasing power in regards to buying Bitcoin. So like people don't understand the conception of that. If like it does become a global currency that is now essentially backing all currencies globally, similar to like what oil is doing right now. The petrodollar kind of is what Bitcoin is trying to become, right?
Right.
That is kind of like a way to put it.
Right. So
it's like we're trying to get rid of that.
Right. So we've been, a lot of people think that we've been fighting for freedom, in the Middle East, but it just so happens that they have a lot of oil. And we've obviously been instrumental in, who controls that oil since our wars started in Iraq, Afghanistan, and all those other nations.
It's not even so much about the oil as much as it is like depletion and the desolation of like the communities, the culture, the land, the everything. Like if we did that in America, it's kind of a problem. People would get pissed. If we did that in the Middle East, not such a problem.
I don't think a lot of people really know how bad, like what those wars really did and how many civilians were affected. I don't think the average American really knows. I don't think that they really understand, right? But anyways, I
conversation
think
for a different day.
Right. I think that Bitcoin is really here to stop all of that, right? Henry Ford said that if we created a currency that was backed by energy, that we would never need to go to war anymore.
Wow.
So,
I didn't know he said that.
Yeah, you could go find a quote from way back when where he mentions this.
Yeah.
And so
the thing that I like is when you look at Bitcoin, it's very similar to gold. And gold was this thing that forever and ever. And you talk about the Anunnaki and everybody, like you're talking about like Greek mythology, any kind of fable or mythology, anything you look into, gold always happens to be this common thing everybody talks about. And alchemy, witchcraft, all of it, like religion. I mean, you talk about gold all the time in every kind of retrospective, anything that you look at universally. Bitcoin is now, and you think about like the internet as another universe. People actually work in it, they live in it basically, they make their money from it. It can't be killed. It's another entity. Like the internet isn't something that can go down. This isn't something that like if we had an EMP hit all of America, it would still exist. The internet would still be alive. People don't understand that.
So yeah, I would love to talk about gold because I already have this whole coin thing that I love to say about gold. And yes, there's a lot of similarities between gold and Bitcoin. But when we look at the value and how much Bitcoin has increased over the last 10 years, and we look at how much gold has increased over the last 100 years, you can see that Bitcoin is just performing a lot better as an asset.
Why?
Well, it's just a lot better than gold, because it's a lot easier to transfer. That's probably the biggest reason. So with
You're
that,
telling me that it's easier to send Bitcoin than it is to borrow gold to China from America?
exactly, yeah, pretty much. So yeah, I mean, there's this big, there's like a meme about like $1 billion worth of gold lying like in a vault, and then there's just like a cold storage wallet, with $1 billion of Bitcoin on it. And just to
Yep.
kind of show like, yeah, it's and then obviously you could also send $1 billion in Bitcoin to another wallet if you wanted to from any exchange that you have it on. Um, but yes, if we look at gold, and I just mentioned that gold hasn't really gone up that much in value, it's pretty much stayed even. But the reason why we've seen it kind of go up in value is kind of again because the value of the dollar has lost so much value over the years. But um, if you look at gold and let's just say, back in the 1920s, right? If you went into a suit shop in New York City or in Chicago at the time, and you had a 1 ounce gold coin, you would have been able to have that tailor make you a beautiful tailored suit for that 1 ounce gold coin. Today, that 1 ounce gold coins were worth roughly around $2,500. And if you went into, New York or Chicago and they accepted gold as a currency, they would also go and, fit you and design a beautifully tailored suit for roughly around $2,500. So what does that mean? It means that the value of gold has actually remained constant, right? And it means it hasn't really gone up or gone down. But that's kind of a good thing because it's acting as a hedge against inflation. So this is why people like to own assets like gold and real estate because they're helping to fight against this of inflation to a degree. But you've got to if you own real estate, there's all these costs to maintain the real estate. And if you're using it as a way to kind of build wealth, then you've got to have a tenant in there. And you got to go and, make sure that that tenant stays employed and that he's going to be able to pay you every single month. And then you've got to go and maintain that property and paint it and do all these things, spend all this money to keep that asset looking and performing well so that hopefully one day you can go and sell it for a lot more than what you purchased it for. So that's the whole goal when people are purchasing real estate. But you've also got to constantly be paying insurance and property taxes on that real estate every single year as well. Now,
There's definitely not a thing closer to passive assets and passive income than cryptocurrency, in my opinion, which is still, and I want to make this a very definite point, still not passive. Passive is like something you put there and you never think about it, you never do anything with.
right.
But
Yeah,
like you still have to be involved on an educational basis at the very, very bare minimum,
right. So
right?
if you go and buy a Bitcoin let's say in a hypothetical way, you go and buy a boatload of Bitcoin because you listened to this video and you understood how valuable Bitcoin is, or at least you just that you made your initial investment. If you take your Bitcoin off of that exchange and you go and put it onto one of these external hard drives called a cold storage wallet, where you're removing it from the exchange, which is the safest place to keep your Bitcoin. That way it doesn't get hacked or stolen. Obviously, you got to make sure that it's in a place where you can find it. And that you have your secret password, which is called a seed phrase, and that's stored in a safe place as well, right? So that you can
Getting
access
deep with it.
it. Yes, that would be the closest form to a passive income investment that you could possibly ever have.
That's
Um,
it.
and if you had cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, or there's others that are really good and are also solving a lot of problems like Solana, you could, if you had it on an exchange like Coinbase, for instance, which is one of the more well-known and trusted exchanges out there, Solana would be paying you if you could do something called staking, right? And you could be earning interest on this Solana and you're getting paid out like every 5 days pretty much. So again, that's turning it now into again a little bit more of a passive kind of asset, passive income asset where you're making money on the asset as it's going up in value. So that's also compounding interest to a certain degree as well, because you're
Right.
getting paid out in Solana as well. So the asset's going up in value, you're getting paid out in Solana, and now you're accumulating more Solana as it's going up.
It seems
And
the more important point of Bitcoin, though, really, before we get into like investment talk, is the
yeah,
important point of Bitcoin, according to Michael Saylor in that video, is a storage of wealth. Because like if you don't have it, your currency is going to go down. The value of your currency is always depleting. It's devaluing every single hour on the hour. If
yeah,
American currency goes down, every other country's currency goes down for the most part. So like when you look at
yeah. And
that,
I think a lot of countries saw this happening, right? They saw that this was going to happen. They knew that the United States dollar was pretty much backed by oil, and we need to go to war in order for our dollar to stay, relevant, and for it to have, a good amount of value behind it. But this
wonder
is
why
one
we're
of
in
the
wars
reasons
now,
why,
huh?
huh?
I said, wonder why we're in a couple wars now, huh?
Yeah, and also why we're perpetually at war all the time, right? I mean, we were supposed to end these wars in the Middle East so long ago, and we're still there. But we always figure out new reasons to stay, and that's it. But
Yeah.
um, what was I
But yeah,
gonna
Bitcoin
say?
Bitcoin really is
Oh,
like a storage of wealth though at the end of the day. You know,
it
when
is.
you're putting your money into that, it's like putting your cash into a mattress, like back in the 1930s. You know, like people used to have their dollar backed by gold. So they were cool with putting their cash in a mattress because they knew their gold was in a safe somewhere. That's what that was. It was like a paper it was like a receipt that said you have gold here. And then
So
eventually that
yeah,
gold didn't exist anymore.
when the US dollar was backed by gold, we certainly had less inflation, and you certainly had a lot more purchasing power, essentially. And also we had a president that tried to put the well, actually it was. We were backed by silver. It was the silver backed dollar. And then that president was assassinated shortly after he did that. Um, so yeah, I guess you can see why presidents would be hesitant to want to go and back the dollar by something that had intrinsic value. But Donald Trump was recently speaking at a Bitcoin conference in Nashville, and he also, he's recently become a big proponent of Bitcoin, and he says that, after doing some research and after listening to his advisors, especially from the Treasury, they're telling him that essentially backing the United States dollar by Bitcoin would save the dollar and solve a lot of the problems that we're currently facing in the United States. Um, and he had made mention of, backing the United States dollar by Bitcoin and on a treasury level, essentially, um, would hinder a lot of the inflation, and it would again make the dollar reign supreme as the world's number one currency, essentially. Whereas
Exactly.
right now, due to BRICS and a few other things, the dollar is actually weakening at a very rapid level right now. And it's kind of
Yep.
scary, and a lot of people are not really noticing it, or we just, we have so much arrogance that this would never happen in the United States, even though this has happened in so many countries around the world. I'm from South Africa. We've seen the South African rand devalue and become close to worthless, and our neighbor to the north, Zimbabwe. I mean, we saw that happen on a massive scale, where you became a trillionaire, right? You got $1 trillion note, but you can't even buy a loaf of bread with that. So it
Correct.
doesn't matter, right? Like, and I see real estate agents also kind of confusing this a lot, right? Where they'll brag about, oh, highest sale in the neighborhood, highest sale, highest, or record breaking sale, and we keep seeing the prices of these mega mansions going, 50 million, 100 million, 200 million. But what is that doing? It's just
Right.
showing that the value of the dollar is becoming worthless, right? It's like
Exactly.
that
Well,
house is not worth, house is
the
not
cool
worth
thing too,
100
like
million.
if you look at back when Big Macs first came out, okay, McDonald's. Again,
Exactly.
trying to keep this
Yeah.
as primitive as possible, right? This is 101, man. We're talking like politics and investments and all this other stuff. Going back to like McDonald's, a Big Mac. Americans know and love Big Macs, right? Like if I had to explain this to my grandma, I would say, Grandma, when the Big Mac came out, how much was it? 45 cents. Okay. So
So that
now
was
you
that was when Ray Kroc started McDonald's, and this was like in the early days. All right.
yeah, Ray Kroc didn't start McDonald's, but he was one of the guys that founded the concept of franchising it and then expanding nationally with it.
Okay.
So I highly recommend to watch The Founder about the Ray Kroc story. Also, he's
All
a
right.
gangster.
Okay.
But yeah, the Big Mac when it first started, it was 45 cents to buy one. You could actually go up with 2 quarters, and you could give those 2 quarters over to the cashier, and you would receive a Big Mac and a nickel. Okay. And then you
Wow.
could take that nickel and you could walk down to your local grocery store and you could probably pick up a loaf of bread, probably. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure.
So the value, the power that you're talking about, the power of purchasing things is extremely low now. You have billionaires where to them, you could go out and you could spend $1 million a day and you're not going to be hindered by much because you're probably going to make that same $1 million back same day. It's like Dana White. He's a billionaire. He went down to the casino. He lost 3 million that night and made it back same night. It didn't affect him to lose $3 million gambling, right? But that three
Right.
million dollars is life changing for every American on planet Earth, pretty much. Okay, so
Right.
when you look at the cost of a Big Mac in 1955 was 45 cents times 17, today's money is $7.65 for that same Big Mac, which it's about approximately that. If I go down to the McDonald's and I buy 3 meals, it's probably going to be about like 21, 22 bucks, maybe not even that. Probably it's more than that, right?
Yeah.
Depending on if you get a
So
meal
we're
or not.
talking about thousands of percentage, in terms of
17
inflation just in
times.
that burger. But
If
another
you
thing
had
about
that,
the
if you
50s,
real quick though, if you had that same $100 in Bitcoin today, and it goes up to $1 million per coin in Bitcoin, that money is now deflated down to 1950, 1960 prices. Your power, your purchasing power goes up
exactly.
17%. Or
And
I'm
this
sorry,
is
17 times.
this is the power of a deflationary asset that's increasing roughly of about 170% on average every year.
And that's
Um,
without people adopting it, by the way. That's
and
like minuscule
this
adoptions.
this is what we say. We say that we haven't even hit the real bell curve yet. Like we're
Nope.
still at the bottom. We're in terms of 99 in 1997, the amount of people that were using the internet, that's where we are in terms of Bitcoin today. We are not at mass global adoption level yet. And this is the reason why we're talking about buying it now today at $60,000, because
Correct.
everybody who thinks that they've missed the boat on Bitcoin, they don't know. This is still early. And you don't need to go on and buy a whole Bitcoin, as I mentioned. You can go and buy a fraction of a Bitcoin, whatever you're comfortable with, right?
To be
If you
honest
want
with
to
you,
go
if you go to Coinbase, you can't buy a Bitcoin. You if you wanted to, if you had 65,000
You
bucks.
wouldn't, not with a brand new account. No, you
Nope.
wouldn't have the credit. You wouldn't have the credit with Bitcoin to be able to go and buy a Bitcoin on day one anyway. So
Correct.
yeah, it takes a lot of time to be able to build up your reputation with Bitcoin, and I mean with Coinbase or other exchanges. And me being a user with Coinbase over the last 10 years, I have I can go and buy a Bitcoin in one day if I wanted to, but it's taken 10 years and us having this relationship for me to be able to go and buy that amount of Bitcoin in one day.
I'm not even at half a Bitcoin. I'm not even at a quarter of a Bitcoin right now.
I would say that you just gotta keep on trying to add as much as you can, because the window, again, like this
Yep.
window is closing. As soon as Bitcoin breaks the all-time high, you mentioned it's right around 74,000, or let's say 73,500. As soon as it breaks that all-time high, and we're weeks away from that happening, it is gonna start racing up to $100,000. That's gonna happen very, very quickly. And then it's very, very likely that Bitcoin is gonna race between $100,000 to $200,000 and peak somewhere around there, or even more by the time we hit the top of this bull cycle.
Yep.
So yes, investing a relatively small amount of money in Bitcoin would be a very, very wise idea. And obviously, this is not financial advice. I'm asking you to go and do your own due diligence before you going and investing
Right.
your earned money into this
Well,
asset. But we're just trying to provide you with some basic knowledge. And you can go into a website like coinmarketcap.com, one word, and you can click on Bitcoin at the top, and there's all the information from a non-biased point of view. You've got the white paper, there's all these other links, so you can go and do your research into Bitcoin, and then it's listing every other cryptocurrency. There's like 10,000 or more, and they're all listed by market cap, and you can go and do your research on anything that you're interested in purchasing.
that's cool, man. Thanks for that little tidbit there. We'll have to create like a little clip of that. But
Yes,
the other part of that too that I would like to mention when we're talking about gold and Bitcoin, there's only so much gold in the world. That's what makes it valuable, right? It's not a reoccurring renewable resource that we can go and like recreate. It's something that exists. There's only so much of it. It's
it's a
finite.
finite, yes, it's finite, but we're also kind of like, in terms of the amount of gold that we've mined. I happen to come from the country that just mines the most amount of gold in the world. And we have been for the last 100 years. We've been the #1 producer of gold for a century, every single year, up until I want to say probably maybe 10 years ago. And now China is the #1 producer of gold in the world, but it's just because they're mining gold in other countries.
Right.
And Africa is one of them.
Yeah. And it says there's about like 244,000 metric tons of gold on planet Earth, they speculate, which it's kind of hard to like wrap your brain around that, right? But the point here is that the market cap, the total amount of value that currently is gold, and like you said, it's very linear. The cost of gold hasn't gone up too much. It's very, very linear. So the market cap for it is about $14.9 trillion, which again, super hard to wrap your brain around. Okay.
And it's the #1
But
asset in the world.
number
Yeah.
one asset in the world. Okay. But, and this is the other thing, BRICS currency that's in other countries that are currently back in, I think, 157 other countries with this currency, which is gold backed. Okay.
Right.
That is going to be replaced by Bitcoin once it hits $15 trillion, which is only $759,109 per coin. It's not even $1 million per coin once it becomes more valuable than Bitcoin. Or I'm sorry, once it becomes more valuable than gold.
Valuable than gold, yeah. So and we're thinking that Bitcoin races to become the #1 asset within the next decade. There's a lot of people that are speculating it to become or hitting $1 million by the time that we hit 2030.
10 years.
10 years.
Less
So
than.
so imagine it going from $60,000 to $1 million over a 10-year period. Where else could you put your money that could have that amount of significant growth? I don't think that there really is anything. And
Again, for perspective, just not to interrupt you, but for perspective, because I'm excited about this. This is, again, the hill that I die on that I talked about earlier. That same $20,000, if you did not put that into the market for Bitcoin, okay, again, not financial advice, but if you didn't, that money, that $20,000 in USD currency, if it wasn't backed by Bitcoin and it happens to be backed by something else and we happen to lose that war, that is now $1,300. If it did get backed by Bitcoin and you did put that money into Bitcoin and you had that 20 grand sitting there, it would be worth $340,000 in about a 6-year period.
from 20,000 to 340,000, I mean, that's a no-brainer. And
Exactly.
again, I feel like people can always find money for things, right? I see people finding money to go and spend money on the dumbest stuff, right? Like,
Yep. Me.
but when it even me too. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm a watch aficionado. I love watches, and I'll
Yep.
spend money on watches because I'm an idiot. But I do own a lot of Bitcoin, and thank goodness I was buying it at a much cheaper price than today. But I'll be honest, and I'll tell you that within the last 2 months, I added another Bitcoin to my portfolio because this was when it was in the 50s. I understand that buying Bitcoin at $50,000, that we're never going to really see these prices ever again in the future. So yeah, man, I was like, I'm gonna find this money to basically go and buy another Bitcoin, even though I don't really have the money. I was renovating a building and all of these other costs that I have. But I was like, man, I don't think we're ever going to see a Bitcoin under $60,000, 3, 4 years from now. It's probably going to be six figures and above forever, and
I
then
agree.
start pushing towards $1 million pretty much. So
Especially with everybody that's getting put into the positions with like the treasurer being Larry Fink potentially, Donald Trump back in Bitcoin, other countries getting on board. America is one of those power countries that is actually in control of the central banks to some degree. I mean, like there's a lot that's at stake right now, but the purchasing power that offers you as an American in America, if it does get backed by Bitcoin, if it does, okay, this means
I,
that houses that are $600,000 on average right now become $35,000 again.
that's exactly the theory. So, and I like to always post videos like this so that people can kind of see like the purchasing power of Bitcoin, because it was like in 2016 it would have been like 5,000 Bitcoin to buy a house, and now
Right.
today it's only like 20 Bitcoin to buy a house or less. So
10. Yeah.
yeah, 10 Bitcoin, exactly $600,000 is your entry level house right now. So yeah, 10 Bitcoin to buy a house, and it was, so many Bitcoin before. But again, most people are like, oh, how do I go and buy 10 Bitcoin right now? Well, you're not, you're not going and buying 10 Bitcoin today. You're just starting slow, you're adding whenever you can. But yeah, you kind of, without trying to rush anybody, you kind of want to be making sure that the bulk of your investments are now while the price is still relatively low, instead of going and taking a mortgage out in your house, 2, 3 years down the line to go and buy, even a smaller amount of Bitcoin than
Correct.
what you could be buying.
Well, even if you didn't go and buy 10 Bitcoin, if you were to take that 20,000, that usually some if you happen to have like some kind of retirement account, you've got like maybe like 20 grand in there if you're at
You
that
have
point in life.
401k or something like that, right?
Something. Okay, on average. That's what the
Right.
average American has. Okay. I'm not talking about some 18-year-old that works at McDonald's that has 20 grand. He might, but I'm talking about the people that are at the end of life, right? Where they can protect themselves, protect their wealth. The storage of wealth is that retirement, right? So if you were to take that 20 grand, not 10 Bitcoin worth, not $600,000 worth, that $20,000, and you were to put it incrementally, 1,000 every other day, every other week, every other month, what have you, right? Into Bitcoin. And that became $340,000. And then houses dropped to 60,000. You have 340,000 to purchase that $60,000 house now. Same token. You have a $60,000 truck in today's money. In the future, if you put that money and hedge your investment against that storage of wealth, that truck to you, as the person who's intelligent and had foresight, is now worth $3,000. You're not paying 60 grand for that truck. You're paying 3,000. Okay.
Right.
Same thing as going to McDonald's. You go down there and you buy 3 meals for your family, and you happen to still eat McDonald's at this time. You buy 3 meals for your family. That's going to cost you $1. You're going to take a Satoshi that's worth about $1, and you're going to go and purchase McDonald's with that, and you still have 340 grand left over. Purchasing power is what Dylan is speaking on. I just want to beat that dead horse here.
I feel like we've done a very good job of that in this episode, and I feel like people really are going to understand that Bitcoin is just kind of going to keep on going up in value forever, right?
Yep.
The more that the network expands, the more countries that adopt it as legal tender as a currency, and the more that we see companies and other types of industries essentially accepting it as a form of payment, the more we're going to see this just kind of explode on a global level. And when that happens, it's already going to be too late, right? And that's when pretty much Bitcoin is going to be already close to $1 million of Bitcoin. So we want to be doing that now while there's still a lot of speculation, and while people still think that it's going to crash to zero and stuff, because that is allowing us to purchase Bitcoin at a little bit of a cheaper price. But yeah, by the time Bitcoin is at or close to $1 million, there's going to be a lot less volatility, and it's going to kind of be like an Amazon stock or a Berkshire Hathaway or something like that, where it's just kind of stabilized to a point where just kind of incrementally going up a little bit, but not really volatile like it is right now.
Mm,
That's how I see it anyway.
I agree. I'm with you. I
Yeah,
think
I
that
mean,
kind of brings us to the
I,
encapsulation of Crypto 101, though. That's kind of the entirety of it there. That's a great cherry on top of the sundae.
yeah, I think that that's a very good place for us to leave it on the first episode. And I think if you're going to go, just to kind of in the conversation over here, if you're going to go and buy Bitcoin, make sure that you're purchasing it on a trustworthy exchange. Go look on YouTube. There's lots of videos about cold storage wallets and things like that, so you can educate yourself about these things and making sure that you're keeping your Bitcoin safe so it doesn't get stolen or hacked or anything like that.
1000%. Yep. And I think in the next episode, it'd be really cool to kind of go over like really what is like decentralized finance. Like how do you understand that from like if I have my money at Chase Bank doesn't exist anymore. So how does that like what does decentralized finance mean on a global scale? Like what does it mean when it comes to like a smart contract within an NFT to be able to like buy a house? Like how
Yeah.
does that give you more protection, more security, more
Oh, man.
transparency than not?
Smart contracts.
Right.
This is going to revolutionize the world, and actually it is going to put a lot of industries out of work. I mean, like smart contracts could literally put realtors out of business. Like people don't understand this, but yeah, we can definitely get into all of that in episode 2. DeFi, NFTs, smart contracts. That's definitely a little bit more of a conversation for another day. But yes, we're going to definitely keep it exciting and keep dropping the knowledge and the value and hoping people learn along the way.
Absolutely. Well, Dylan, I appreciate your time today, bud. Guys, just so you are aware, also, Dylan and I are going to be putting together this thing that's called School with Alex Ramosi. And it's going to be basically like a crypto school, essentially. Like it's going to basically teach you everything about what that future technology looks like, how it impacts your life, because it's not about if it's going to happen. It will happen. It's happening
Yes,
right now. You are
yes.
already doing it. You're just not aware of it.
It's
And
bigger
so,
than
like,
the internet. It's bigger than the internet. It's not going
way
anywhere,
bigger.
guys. This
No,
is
no, no.
not, it's only going
Like,
to get bigger. Yeah.
decentralization of you name it, religion, food, water, everything. Like the decentralization of our global population, everything that we do, purchasing houses, all of it, everything. It is all going to be radically changed here in a very, very, very short amount of time. And you
Mhm.
have to understand it or you'll get left behind, AI included, chat GPT, all these things. Robots are here. They're
And
in our
it's
houses, they're helping us.
and it's happening at a pivotal moment as well, because where a lot of the powers that be are trying to centralize everything and trying to, take full control of everything, we as the people are recognizing that we have these technologies to free us. So it's exciting, and I'm excited for the future, and I'm excited to share all of this with you in episode 2.
Likewise, man. Thank you so much. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll chat with you again next time on Beyond the Block. Talk to you guys later.
Peace out, Don. Have a good one.